Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and I am here today with Holly again, and we are ready to dive into our next topic in the Leadership Traits series. So, Holly, today we are talking about surrendered ambition. We couldn't really come up with a one-word trait,
you're right.
one-word way to describe this. But this was a topic that you brought up that you wanted to bring into this series. So could you tell us a little bit about why you thought of this and why you feel like it's important to talk about?
Yeah, so it's probably because I have struggled with this. So I am going to make a guess that if you have even an ounce of ambition in you and you are a Christian woman, that you have felt the tension that I want to talk about today. And when we're talking about the traits of a leader, one of the big one for me has been this, because it's something, as I just said, as I've struggled with. So it is the tension between our internal ambition for like big goals and dreams that we have. And then on the other side of that, the command of God to build His kingdom and not our own. So for me, this has been such a gray area, and an area where I have really felt pulled in both ways. And we know that building God's kingdom doesn't look the same way for each person. We're all built with specific gifts and talents. And it seems to me that some people are able to achieve those big dreams while others are required to lose everything in service to God's kingdom. So I've really found myself waffling between working really hard to achieve a dream of mine, and then the next day turning it all over to God and saying, okay, you can send me to Africa if you want. So I'm on the struggle bus here. So I really felt like I had to not be the only one. And so this has to be something that we talk about. So have you ever experienced what I'm talking about? Tell me I'm not alone, Esther.
Okay. I do not think you're alone. And I think even just knowing many of the women we've had on the show, I think this has been expressed in various ways. I have definitely experienced it. I think that I do tend to be on the driven end of the spectrum, where I tend to be someone who wants to get stuff done. I have trouble slowing down. And I think for me, a lot of times I get so caught up in the doing and the, reaching my goals and getting things done that I miss out on just the basic like relationship with God and the slowing down and that part of it. And obviously that is part of being surrendered to Him. And so that's definitely been a struggle for me. And I also really like to know that my work is making an impact and making a difference.
Yeah.
And so when God calls me to do something quote unquote small in my mind, I feel like it's not really important. Like I struggle with doing that and being obedient to that, because I feel like it's not significant enough. It's not impacting enough people. And we've talked about this like on the episode about leading small. That was kind of part of that idea, was the importance of leading small. But for me anyway, that can be hard to do. And so those are some of my own struggles with this idea. I think too, I find myself getting frustrated when other people are not as motivated as I am.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, people, let's get this thing done and stop sitting around, praying. Like, let's do some stuff. Okay, no, I don't ever really say that, people. But you know what I mean? Like that is the tendency
Yeah.
of some of us is to be more focused on the doing and the getting things done versus the being with God, the prayer, the again, quote unquote, slower or smaller things that are just
Yes.
as important in our walk with him and in our leadership. And so the last thing I want to say about this too, and it may not be totally coherent.
That's
As I
okay.
told Holly this before we recorded, we have run out of coffee in my home. And this is definitely impacting my ability to speak. But I feel like there's kind of this weird paradox that happens in our faith in that sometimes the people who do like what you were talking about at the beginning, Holly, about having to give everything up and, whatever,
Yeah.
sell all your belongings and go somewhere else. Some of the times I think that those people who do that, and even the people who are achieving the quote unquote big dreams, there's a lot of stuff that we don't see. And a lot of
Mm,
times I think that those people are the most fulfilled when they are truly being surrendered to God and truly giving up a lot of maybe what they had wanted.
yeah.
And like I guess I just think that we need to be cautious about labeling what someone else is doing as being too ambitious because we don't truly know what's going on behind the scenes and we also don't know their heart. We don't
Yeah.
know the status of their heart. And so I guess for me it's like I want to be fully surrendered to God, but that doesn't have to mean that he won't also have me do certain things that someone might consider to be a big thing. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? What I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, it does. And I think when I hear you talk about that, a lot of it comes down to comparison, like what God has called me to do versus what God has called you to do. And
Yeah.
we say, like, for me, like, why couldn't I have as big a platform as Jenny Allen, let's say, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, or,
Yeah.
this other person that in my mind is like totally killing it when in fact God hasn't called me to that, or he hasn't
Right.
called me to that just yet, or maybe he never will. And so it becomes a comparison thing when in fact I have a calling, I have people that I have to serve right in front of me that I'm
Yeah.
missing. And so,
Right.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely how I sort of feel about it too. And I think a piece of this for me, and not just from like the ministry side of it, from the business side, like when you are in sort of relationship or have friends who also have businesses and stuff like that, and you're kind of in that world, especially in the online space, it's like, go kill it, go do this, go do that, make this
Mhm.
big, 6-figure business or hit 1 million or whatever. And I constantly have to remind myself that while some of the tactics that people use to get there are good business practices, that might not be my idea of success, or it might not be what God is calling me to. And yes, I can learn practically about those things, but I need to be constantly remembering what I'm put on this earth to do and what
Yeah.
my idea of success is and what God has defined it for me. So I don't want to get too
Mm.
ahead of ourselves, but
Yeah.
there's definitely a tension there. And I think if you're in the same boat as Esther and I, you have definitely felt that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So true.
So really what is ambition? It's a strong desire to achieve something, and it's generally going to be required to put in some hard work and have determination. Now, I really just want to say that I do believe that this is a trait that God crafts within us. Some perhaps more than others, but I don't believe that ambition in and of itself is a bad thing or that it's sinful. I think that
Right.
it more has to do with what we are wanting to achieve that turns it into an issue of sin or not sin.
Yeah. And maybe I'm just thinking too, it could also be why we want to achieve that thing,
Yes,
our
exactly.
motivation behind it.
Yeah.
And if it's a pride issue, that's definitely gets into the territory of sin. So,
Right, right.
yeah.
But I mean, I know I mention him often, but when I think of Joseph, like he's had in my mind, and I don't know him and I'm sort of extrapolating from the story, but he's someone that I would say had ambition because
Mhm.
when he was at Potiphar's house, he, quickly rose through the ranks. And then, he rose through the ranks each time he was placed in a new situation. And to me, that's someone with ambition.
Yeah.
And so I think there are other biblical stories and characters that we could identify with ambition as well. So, as leaders, ambition often is a trait that we come by naturally. And we have talked to some people who have felt like they are unlikely leaders, and perhaps they wouldn't call themselves ambitious, but it often takes a certain amount of ambition and motivation to achieve something, whether or not that's what they set out to do from the beginning. Oftentimes, they've been thrown into the place of leadership and they've stuck it out and they have excelled and done well, whether or not that's what they were going for. So,
Yeah.
the world praises us for getting the job done, for creating jobs, for climbing the success ladder. I mean, all of these things are like the carrot that the world kind of dangles in front of us. But what we really want to talk about is what God calls us to. And today we want to unpack this thought and perhaps help you settle the tension that is in your mind about this topic. And this is just as cathartic for me, helping me settle the tension that's in my mind constantly of trying to achieve, having this big business and having this big platform, this ministry versus maybe God just wants me to do X, Y, and Z. Like I need to be remembering that. So,
Yeah.
Esther, what do you think about this?
Yeah. So I would say that I echo everything you just pointed out. I think that one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is because as leaders, we do actually need to have some level of ambition to lead people, like you just pointed out, to accomplish a task or to lead a team or to, cast a vision. There needs to be some ambition there. But we also at the same time have to be fully surrendered to God and to his will and to not just achieving our own goals or dreams. And so, it's like we need to be someone who is eager to get the work done, somebody who keeps things moving forward, as we might say, keeping our foot on the gas pedal and making sure that we're setting the pace for the team, setting the pace for the vision of the church or the organization or the business. But we also still have to be really continually surrendered and willing to be redirected to where God is leading, because sometimes that might be totally different than what we had in our mind in the first place. So we have to be willing to hold things with an open hand and not be so tied to our picture of what the results are going to be in any particular endeavor. And I think that's where a lot of us get hung up, is we get stuck on, even I would say, I've heard different leaders talk about this before, where it's like they felt like God gave them a vision for something. So it was going to be, their ministry was going to look a certain way in 3 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they finally got to that point, it looked totally different.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that God changed his mind or that God didn't give that person the vision, but it's almost like that vision was what got them moving and got them taking action.
Yeah.
And then God said, well, actually, it's going to look different. We're going to change things up here. But that was the motivation, the starting point for them to take action. And then I think that the other side of the coin is that sometimes we can be afraid of our ambition, right? And so we can actually, and this is something that Jenny Catron talked about way back. I think she was episode 11, I want to say, way back at the beginning. She shared about that she's naturally ambitious. She's somebody who's, kind of take charge, get things done. But she was kind of getting pushback from team members and getting some feedback that wasn't altogether positive about the way she was using her gifts. And so then she started to hold back and not use her natural ambition. And that can sometimes be just as dangerous as going too far to the other extreme of like using it and forgetting to be surrendered. So I think definitely this tension is a tough one to work out. And I don't know that we're going to have like all the answers in this episode, but hopefully it gives you something to think about and gives you some points to reflect on in your own life.
Yeah. I love that, because I think that I love the idea of when you were just talking about sort of that spectrum of being sort of super duper ambitious versus the fear of being too ambitious. Like you're kind of either all out there or you're holding back. And I think that, again, I find as my life goes on that so much of it is attention, and it's a balance, and it is a tension between two different sides of what to us feel like opposites, but in fact may not actually be. So I just wanted to talk about some of the sort of biblical perspective on this. And, we plan our episodes out a little bit. And so we had planned to do this episode this week. And this past Sunday, my pastor actually preached a sermon that was tied so well to this topic that I just want to reference a few things that he said in his sermon. And I'll post the link if you want to watch the whole message. It's the whole service. So he doesn't actually start talking in his sermon until about the 40-minute timestamp in the YouTube video. But regardless, some of the things that he said tied so well with this. And I think like just another example of how God is faithful in our lives, the things that we're thinking about and the things that we're mulling over and talking about, and it shows up in a sermon. So if that's ever happened to you, you know what I'm talking about. So one of the verses that my pastor referenced in his sermon was 1 John 2:15-17. And it's, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. And so if you've ever heard this verse, you may have heard it preached with some really like condemning preaching. And it's not that it's not, it definitely is, but I don't want this to sit heavy on you. I think really what it comes down to, as we were talking about, is your motivation. What's the why behind what you're doing? And if it is any of these things that he lists, that's when we need to realize that those things and the things of the world are going to pass away. And so he's inviting us to exchange those things for the will of God in our lives. And so I just want to define that list in the middle of that verse. The lust of the flesh is really internal cravings and addictions. The lust of the eyes are external desires, envy, materialism, things that are more outward. And then the pride of life is pursuit for status, position, and recognition. So when we're thinking and reflecting on our motivations as for why we are hungering after this specific goal, if it falls into any of those categories, it's really a place where we want to have some reflection and we want to try to have some surrender of the things that we're doing towards God and asking him to instead really fill those places with his will and a desire for us to be obedient to him. Now, does that mean that you're going to stop doing exactly what you're doing? Does that mean that your business gets shut down or your ministry gets shut down because you're doing it for the wrong reasons? Maybe. But it also may just mean that you need to have a perspective shift and a time of repentance and recommitment to what is actually most important. And so this all kind of comes down to a simplicity, and it's an inward contentment that leads to an outward conviction. And probably one of the quotes that I loved the most that he said in this sermon was, God does not want us guilty. He wants us responsible. And I just love that so much because, as I said, I've heard this verse preached from a really convicting, condemning way. I guess convicting is not the word, because if convicting, that's the Holy Spirit, a condemning way. And God doesn't want us guilty. He's already paid for all of those things. He just wants us responsible. So I guess all this comes down to is that we just need to accept the reality that Jesus has strongly warned us against the pursuit of wealth and status. So it's about that pursuit rather than what you're actually doing. And I'll just reference a couple other verses really quickly. And then we're going to actually talk about how we can develop this trait of being surrendered in our ambition. So Matthew 16:26 says, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? And Luke 16:13 says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So again, here, I want to just say that having money is not a sin. Being in a position of status or power is not a sin. we're talking about the pursuit of money and the pursuit or addiction of wealth and status. So I'm hoping that that helps clear some of the gray area in your mind. I know it does for me. And I do also want to say, because for me, like, I want to provide for my family. I want to help put food on the table. I want us to live a debt free lifestyle. I want us to, have the things that we need. But that doesn't mean I need a 5-bedroom house with a 35 car garage. Maybe you do need that. Maybe that's what it is for your life. I'm not judging that, but what I'm saying is I want to try to live with simplicity and contentment and not be shooting for things that are not necessary for my lifestyle. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts on any of those things before we
I
talk
do.
about how we develop?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really loved all of what you just shared. And I think there were a couple things that really stood out to me. One is just, I guess I never looked at this passage in First John in the way that you just pointed out those three different things that are mentioned: the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. And like,
Mm,
just thinking about it, it's like I can immediately think about like which one of those would be my downfall.
yeah.
And I can
Yeah.
even think of people that I know well who have shared like, which of those three would be more that they might be more tending towards. And I think what happens sometimes when we talk about this topic is we think about it from our perspective of what
Yeah.
we struggle with, and we forget that people struggle in different ways with this issue of ambition. So I think it's just super helpful to keep that in mind, that when we talk about this topic, that it's like you were saying at the very beginning, this is going to look different for everybody.
Mm,
And then the other point that really stood out to me is this idea of, the conviction piece. And that,
yeah.
again, this is one of those areas that we cannot dictate what it should be for other people.
Yeah.
And I did a whole episode about this issue of leaders sharing about their personal convictions, which I'll link to,
Yeah.
because I think this is a big thing that we get convicted about. Like, well, okay, I should live in this particular way, right? Like
Mm,
maybe I shouldn't have a 5-bedroom house and a 35
yeah.
car garage. I don't know if anybody needs a 35 car garage, but like it's easy to make, if you decide, okay, we're going to downsize, we're going to live really simply, we're going to sacrifice XYZ for this reason, we start to think that that is how everybody should live.
Exactly.
And this is where
Yeah.
we have to be really careful about the comparison thing, not just in terms of why are you not giving me this particular thing, God, but also we need to be careful that we're not judging other people for not living
Mm,
according to the way that God has personally convicted us to live in
yeah.
regards to our ambitions. So
So
I just think
important.
that's really a key
Yeah.
point here.
So, all right, we would like to talk about how we develop this trait. And it's so funny because all these other things we've been able to get down to one word, but this idea of surrendered ambition is just taking that desire and that motivation to achieve and placing it in God's hands and letting Him use it for what He wants, what He wills, and sort of, like you said earlier, holding the outcome with loose hands.
Yeah.
So, Esther, do you have any ideas about how we can work on this?
Yeah. So we have a few thoughts. One of the thoughts I have that I think is really important is to just reflect on your own motivations. So we're kind of talking about this idea of this being between you and God, the Holy Spirit convicting you. But you may also need to just sit down and take the time to think about this, to pray about this, and ask yourself, if this particular thing that I'm working towards, whether it's money, whether it's a role, a promotion, a business, possessions, whatever it is, if that got taken away tomorrow or today, would I be completely devastated? Would I lose hope? Would I be angry at God? Like, there's a lot of things that we, need to think through. And if God asks you to give these things back to Him and give those things over to Him, how would it affect you? How would you respond? And so I think if you find that you would be completely resentful, angry, hopeless, whatever it might be, then you might be putting too much weight on that achievement or that goal versus your relationship with God. And I want to throw in one more thing that we haven't really talked about here, because we're all different. And I think there are some people who are not super motivated by goals or achievement. But one of the things that Jesus talks about in the New Testament is he asks people to give up their family sometime. And that is
Yeah.
that's a very scary thing. And I don't think that we put that in the same bucket as ambition, but it can
Right.
definitely be something that we are not willing to surrender to God in terms of our family relationships. And so just putting that in there to consider this in your motivations too.
Yeah.
But
That's a good
just,
one.
I think continually asking God to show you your heart and be willing to confess, any wrong motives that you have and to make changes or shifts when needed. If
Mm.
he does ask you to give something up, like for real, are you willing to do it? We've
Yeah.
had people on the podcast who have walked away from a successful job, who have given up their home, who have sold everything and moved somewhere. There's people that have done that. And I don't believe that is something that God has asked me to do, but I definitely need to consider, if God did ask me to give something up, would I be willing? You know,
Mm.
it's a hard thing to do, but really it comes back to that motivation of why would I be upset? Why would I have the hopelessness, and get to that deeper why, so that you can ask God to deal with that in your heart. And I
Mm.
just want to mention, if you're hearing my dog barking, she is just being difficult right now. So I apologize.
It's okay.
We've tried everything, and you just might have to have a little Allie in your life right now.
This is a safe space.
Oh, it might not be so safe for her after we're done. No, I just need to go play with her. Okay, so the second thing that we want to talk about here in terms of developing the trait of surrendered ambition is to practice generosity. So Matthew
Mm.
10:8 says, "Freely you have received, freely give." And we're speaking mostly right now. I know that the majority of our audience is in the United States or North America, where we do have like way more than we actually need on a
Mm.
day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
There are some people that listen who are in other parts of the world, and so just know that most of what we're saying in regards to this is applying to those of us who have already been given a lot more than we actually need. So we could give up a lot of what we have without serious sacrifice. Although for
Mm.
some people, they are very tied to their possessions and it is hard to give them up. But just practicing generosity in general, I think, is starting to be more open handed with everything you have. And that's
Mm.
not just possessions, it's not just money. It could be your time, your gifts, your skills, and looking for opportunities to use those things or give those things away in whatever capacity God might lead you to. I know there's a
Mm.
lot of people who give of their gifts and volunteer in their churches in a significant way. And that's one way to be generous. So don't let like the fact that maybe, oh, well, I'm still in debt and I don't have, extra money right now. Don't let that make you think that you can't be generous, because you can still practice generosity
Right.
even if you don't have quote unquote extra money.
Yeah.
So that's another one. And that's one I have to work on big time, because I definitely am not. That's not a natural tendency for me to be generous. And
Yeah.
so I have to be more intentional about finding ways to do it.
Mm. I think it comes down to practicing that muscle and making it work a little bit more. And it's like one of those things where we can do this in a sort of really, or we can start to do this in a way that doesn't feel super sacrificial, but then move into higher level sacrifices. And I'm not saying, give away your house, but if God really asks you to give away your house, then do it. I guess what I'm saying is there's always another level of generosity that we can be pushing to. And it really helps us to, when those bigger situations or bigger life circumstances happen, that really does take away something major in our lives, we have already practiced the trait of giving things that mean something to us and doing it with an open heart. And so I'm not going to say it necessarily makes it easier, but it's something that you've already practiced. And so you're probably more quickly to return to the fact that God is going to supply all of your needs, regardless of what he's asking you to give up. So I hope that made sense. But okay. So the third thing that we can do to build this idea of surrendered ambition is to pursue a greater legacy instead of a greater lifestyle. And again, this is something that came from that sermon that my pastor preached. And he just said that my legacy is the sum total of my pursuits, not the sum total of my purchases. And I think that definitely gets to the more possession money side of this. But what I really want to focus on is the greater legacy. So, what is the greatest legacy you can have when you look at your life from the end? And I think that, if you're a Christian, you definitely know that the greatest legacy is building God's kingdom, sowing seeds of his gospel into other people's lives, seeing life change. We know that those have eternal consequence and eternal value. And so that's really the vantage point that this greater legacy comes from rather than this greater lifestyle. So Luke 12:22-23 says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." And Luke 12:31 says, "But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." And so it really comes down to the fact that what has the longest lasting value and when you come down to the end of your life, if you were to look back, what is the thing that you would be most satisfied with when you think about how you have really leaned into giving God glory and making his name famous and all of those things. And so this greater legacy is really about not whether you run this huge ministry or whether you have this big business. It's what you've done with those things and how well you have surrendered them to God and used them for his will. So, Any final thoughts on that before we wrap up, Esther, about surrendered ambition or about this sort of biblical view?
I think that just what you said, making sure that you are actually looking at what God has given you and using it for his glory. I think if you're coming back to that on a regular basis, he's going to keep you in check. He's going to keep you humble. He's going to keep you reminded of the reasons for what you are doing. It's like even our gifts, as you're talking about, I was thinking about, this idea of legacy, and like part of that in my mind is using your gifts to the fullest extent possible that you can bring to the world. But even your gifts come from God. Everything we have is from him. And so essentially we are able to just offer it back to him and to others and share that with others. And when we do that, some of us may have gigantic platforms or businesses or whatever, and others may be doing things behind the scenes that nobody ever notices. But that's not what it's about. It's really, like you said, it's about that legacy of whatever he has given you and that you're willing to give back to him.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget, we get this sort of mindset that if God asks us to surrender something, that it's going to be terrible. It's going to be horrible. We're going to be living in this like dirt hut and it's going to be awful. But we seem to forget that God has a way, the Holy Spirit has a way of softening our heart. And if we are following after him and in relationship with him, it says that he will give us the desires of our heart. And a lot of times I think that is a process of him and us in cooperation with him, aligning our heart with his.
Yeah.
And so you may love whatever the thing he asks you to give up and whatever condition you may be going to, you may find that that's the most fulfilling place you've ever been.
Yeah.
And so we forget these things. And I think that that's part of why some of us run towards this pursuit of these bigger goals, because if we surrender and we allow God to do that work, it may be scary and it may be something that we never pictured for ourselves, but we forget the fact that God is, and the Holy Spirit and Jesus is a gentleman, and he loves us and he wants our good. And so it's not this sort of fight of, okay, go sell everything and live in Africa, and serve there. It's more of, how can I join you in the work that you're already doing? And how can I love the people that you love? And how can my heart look like your heart? Yeah. And so it's not as contradictory as we think it is.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That's
good. So let's just wrap up. And we want to share, as we've done before, an action step that you can take. And this is really more of a reflective action step. It's not an ambitious action step, I should say. So we would just want you to take time and reflect on your motivations, and really reflect on your motivations behind your ambition. So if you are seeking after a particular goal, a particular achievement, a particular career path, whatever it might be, take some time to pray and reflect and ask God to show you if any of those things are out of line. And if you need to surrender to him that thing that you're chasing after. Or, on the other side of things, maybe you've been holding back on your ambition. Maybe your motivation has been fear, and you've been motivated by being afraid of what people are going to think if you do that thing. And so consider that too. And perhaps he's pointing you to, okay, it's time to actually take action on this. So we don't want to claim to know your heart or God's stance on that. So we just want to encourage you to take the time to think about it and pray about it. So.
And we would love to hear, you don't have to give us the deep, journalings that you have out of this, but we'd love to hear if there was any sort of perspective shift or change or anything that you've gleaned from this episode. Even if it's just, I felt that myself too. We'd love to hear about that in the Facebook group. So if you're not in our Facebook group, go ahead and join. We tell you this every time we have an episode, but this is where we have, a lot of the conversations about the episodes, and we're able to kind of go deep and get different perspectives from different women in different places of their life, and just makes conversation so much richer when there's more of us in it. So this is your personal invitation to join that conversation in the Facebook group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Are you ready for this fun question? Because I don't know if I am.
Now I'm regretting choosing this question.
Yeah, this is your choice. You should be regretful for me because mine's worse. My answer to this is worse. I don't know.
Okay,
pretty
well,
bad.
let's preface it.
Bad.
Let's preface it with the story. Okay. So at the time we're recording this, I think it was yesterday, this video started going viral on Facebook and other places because a lawyer showed up to like a hearing with a judge on Zoom, but he had a filter on and he was a kitten. And it's hilarious. If you haven't watched the video, you need to laugh. Just like,
it's totally worth it.
I'll see if I can put it in the show notes, but if not, I'm sure if you just Google Zoom kitten, you will get it.
Zoom kitten lawyer.
By the time this episode comes out, this may be old news, but it got us thinking about embarrassing moments on Zoom.
I can't believe we're talking about this. Okay.
So over the past year, I was on Zoom. I've been using Zoom for like the past 4 years.
Yeah.
But in the past year, everybody who works, who had to stay home because of the pandemic, who needed to get their work done, a lot of people, including judges and lawyers, have been using Zoom for their meetings. And there's been lots of funny other scenarios of things that have happened, embarrassing moments on Zoom, right? Mm-hmm. So we thought it would be fun.
No, Esther thought it would be fun.
I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea to share about our most embarrassing moment on Zoom. All right. Now,
oh gosh,
if you're still listening and you hear us confess ours, you need to post in the Facebook group and tell us yours, because it will make us feel better. And Holly's like thinking that she never is going to be my friend again after this episode.
I'm never going to show myself in public. It's fine. Whatever.
All right. So
it was nice knowing you all.
Go first?
I guess so.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway. So my husband and I both work from home, and he very graciously has given me the only spot in our house that is an actual office. So his desk is in our bedroom next to our bed, which, if you've been working home and remote, like you just find a spot to put a desk and that's where you sit.
Yeah.
And poor him, he has to sit sometimes in dirty laundry in our room or unmade bed or whatever. So he's been really dealing with that, but he's very kind to me and has given me my own office. So he is a morning person and he starts work much earlier than I do because he's an employee of a business. And so his day starts at 8:00. Because I own my own business, I can kind of start whenever I want to. And because I am not a morning person, I generally am still in bed by the time he is starting his work day.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to work on that. I'm trying to get up earlier, but it's been a lifelong struggle. That's another episode. So this one day, he was on a call where he was talking, and I was half asleep, half awake, mostly somewhere there in the middle.
Where you're not totally coherent yet and you're not
totally
thinking
there.
Clearly.
And I kind of knew sort of in a very far away way that he was on a call, but it hadn't really registered in my mind. Okay. And I proceeded to let out a very large fart while he was talking.
So he was not on mute.
No.
Definitely heard by the other parties.
It was definitely heard. And that immediately woke me up. And I literally sat up in bed and went, and he looked at me and started laughing hysterically and giving me a dirty look and the whole thing. And I could not stop laughing and being embarrassed and basically just moaning over my embarrassment. And I cannot believe that I'm sharing this on a podcast. It's just crazy.
Oh.
But nonetheless, that is what I did. And, honestly, it was embarrassing for me, but really it was probably more embarrassing for Zach because if anyone heard that, they probably thought it was him because they don't know that I'm laying there next to him in bed.
Right,
they just assume that he's in some office in his house when in fact he's actually in our bedroom. So yes, I did that.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right.
That's a great way to wake up.
Yeah. And it's there's no taking it back. It's just, there's no recovering from that. But the good news is, here's the thing, Holly. You didn't have to see those people. You weren't seeing them.
Yes.
They didn't actually see you and be like, oh, the Holly, ha ha ha. So, it's
truly, when we talk about public embarrassment, it was really more embarrassing for Zach.
Okay. Yeah.
But still, now I'm telling you. So
now everybody knows. So any of his coworkers who work with him, if they were on that call, they know now.
He was probably on the call with some C-level board member or something important like that because he has those calls often. And, there I am being the woman behind the man.
And he didn't want to say, that was my wife. Throw you under the bus.
Oh, my word. Okay. Well,
okay.
Anyway. All right. So it's time for you. I have shared my embarrassing thing. So.
All right, well, that wraps up our episode for today.
No, that is not fair. You have to share yours. It's your idea to do this question.
So in the Facebook group, here's the thing. If we remember to do this, I feel like half the time we say, we're going to post this in the Facebook group and then we forget. But
I've been doing it somewhat.
Yes, but but we need to know whose embarrassing moment is more embarrassing. Okay, because we are debating this.
Yes,
and my feeling is that mine is more embarrassing. Okay.
You're probably right, but I just can't get over it. So,
okay. So here's the deal. Back in the beginning of my business, I joined my very first group coaching program. I actually talked about this on my other podcast, the Christian Woman Business Podcast. Recently, I told them about my first big investment that I made in my business. And I was on one of the first calls with about 12 other women. Okay. And so, on Zoom, you could depending on your view, you see the speakers' faces and then you see everybody up at the top in the little squares, right?
Mm-hmm.
So during the call, this was like a 2-hour call or maybe even longer. I don't remember. And so I had to go to the bathroom. And so I was like, okay, like I have a laptop, so I don't want to miss what's being said. So I want to keep hearing it. And so I wanted to keep hearing it. So I brought the laptop with me into the bathroom. You can already know where this is going. Oh, okay. I still can't believe that this happened. Okay. So I was like, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to make sure my video's off, all the things, right? I thought all the things were off and I didn't see my little face up at the top. So I thought I'm all good. Okay. Right.
I can't stop laughing. I'm sorry.
So in my bathroom, I have there was like a stool or a chair like near the toilet. So I set my computer down on the stool so I could still see everybody. And I start getting ready to go to the bathroom. So I'm starting to unbutton my pants. And all of a sudden, I see a green light on my computer. And I'm like, oh my word. I'm like, I rush over, I grab the computer, I take it, I turn it away, I put it on the sink and I turn it away. And then I realize the video was not off. Okay. The video was still on. And I'm about to pull my pants down and go to the bathroom. Oh my word.
Did anyone notice?
Well, so here's what happened later. So I don't know what I did. I probably took the computer out of the room far away and then went to the bathroom. But then when I got back on and I turned the video back on, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my word, like these people hardly know me. And
Yep.
But because the video, like the squares, you don't see everybody's squares. Like not everybody would have been seeing my square up there for one thing. But secondly, I did find out later that somebody was like, I was about to say something, Esther. But it didn't quite get to the point where they had to say something because I caught it before it was too late. But I was just like, if I had actually done that, I think I probably would have sacrificed the money that I spent on that and just never, ever shown my face ever again. I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, I can't. I mean, I don't know. Like at least on mute now, I don't know. I feel like the controls have changed. Now you can stop someone's video as the admin, but like if the admin hadn't noticed, if she didn't see me.
Yeah. Bad news.
Oh, anyway. So that was like a super close call, but it's embarrassing that it even got to the point that it did. And I was very embarrassed. So I have Zoom paranoia now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm so paranoid about Zoom. Like I will mute myself and walk away and go into the next room to go to the bathroom. And I will still come back and check and make sure that it's muted. Because I don't even want someone to hear me.
You've been scarred for life.
Oh, it's yeah. All right. So friends, you need to share your embarrassing moment on Zoom if you've had one. We need to know.
I'm not letting you pick the question again.
We may just tell Brian, can you just cut that whole last 10 minutes out of the episode?
Oh my goodness. I can't believe it. But,
all right.
This is real life. This is us. We're just trying to keep ourselves humble.
I was just going to say, this is why people love us. Because
this is really keeping me humble.
It's keeping us humble because we're just real. We're real people. We are not
real people who have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And who pass gas.
Who fart. If anybody was like, this was their first episode, they're out of here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're done.
It was nice chatting with you if this was your first episode.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you, friend, for being here today, for listening. If this episode has helped you think more deeply or laugh more hysterically, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a future episode. And we will talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.